Our greetings, everyone. We are live again. Dynasty Mirror Search for Huru. Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Also, make sure you go to dynastymirror.com and also visit Donfo, D-A-N-F-O, Donfo.Africa. We are rolling to Sierra Leone on Sunday. Man, we're leaving on Sunday. It's right around the corner. So we're leaving on Sunday. So listen, we got one more spot left. If you last minute, if you want to roll, hit me up. Go to Donfo.Africa, send me a message. Also, if you have DNA results from African ancestry, which connect you back to Sierra Leone, you are eligible for citizenship. Again, from African ancestry, which connects you back to Sierra Leone, you are eligible for citizenship. So hit me up if you guys are interested, anybody out there in joining. And also, we are rolling to Nigeria in August 11th through the 20th, August 11th through the 20th for the Oshun Festival. So if you're interested in attending the Oshobo Festival, hit me up. We're rolling August 11th through the 20th. Without further ado, we have, one of the Search for Who favorites, Brother Ebube Okoli, on with us today. And we're going to be discussing. So, you have the Dangote refinery coming online, hopefully soon. We see what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine. I didn't know, Ebube, I had no clue the amount of countries in Europe and even somewhat in America who used Russia or imported Russian oil and natural gas. I had no clue.
So, yeah, Russia's number 3 in the world, I believe. Recently, for the last few years, in terms of output, they've been number 3. And you gotta think about it. Oil and gas is used by every nation on the face of the earth. So you got the number 3 producer. Everybody's gonna be using their product, if you will.
Right. So I had no clue. So I guess now, Europe, allegedly, they're trying to, because of the war, they're trying to step away from Russia. But that leaves an opportunity for countries like Nigeria to kind of fill that void. And not only that, right now the Naira is just tanking. So I said, why won't, hey, if you want to buy our oil, in Delta or from the Dangote refinery or whatnot, you need to buy it with Naira. That's what the U.S. does with the petrodollar. That's somewhat what Russia's doing now, saying you got to buy our gas with the ruble. Why not buy Nigerian oil using the Naira?
Well, it's that you got to go back in time a little bit, which we will. Before I answer that question, I'll just do a brief introduction for those who don't know who I am. For those who do, it's good to see you again. My name is Ebube Okoli, as Dynasty Mirror rightfully pointed out. I'm a Nigerian-born, American-trained geopolitical analyst and attorney. I'm also the host of Up Close and Center. If you haven't been to Up Close and Center, make sure you head on over and you subscribe. The logo looks like this, black circle, white lettering. Over there, we do detailed, in-depth geopolitical analysis and documentaries on issues that relate to the world at large, but are focused on Africa in the final analysis. And I've been getting a lot of emails from people asking for more content. Don't worry, I got more content coming. Part of the issue is that I have to read between 3 to 4 books for every documentary I do, because there's a lot of information. You got to know what you're talking about. And I always like to cross-reference the experts within that particular field. But I got about 6 documentaries done. I'm going to be releasing 1 a month, as well as a Come Fly With Me. So every 2 weeks, I will be releasing content. So if you haven't already subscribed and made sure that you turn the bell notification icon on, go ahead and hit that. Dynasty, and also too, here on this channel, make sure you're subscribed and make sure that you hit the like button here. But to answer your question, Dynasty, that was a very good question. Why isn't Nigeria making its oil transactions mandatory in the Naira? Now, before we even get there, we have to back up and ask ourselves how we even got to the position where Nigeria would make oil transactions with foreign nations with the dollar. right? And these transactions don't necessarily involve the United States. So if Nigeria, for example, wanted to sell oil from the Niger Delta, southeastern Nigeria, wherever it's getting it from, to India, those transactions would be in dollars. Even though neither Nigeria or India have the official currency using the dollar. So we have to go back in time to the Bretton Woods Convention. Right after World War II, America was in a very advantageous position. America's position is essentially, there's a book or a theory by Alexander Durgan about the land power, the sea power, heartland theory, different things of that nature. But America during World War II was in a good position because if you think of America, there's a sea to one extreme, and then there's another sea to the other extreme. So you have the Atlantic and you have the Pacific. And so America is basically insulated, and then to the north, you have a very friendly ally in Canada. America never really had to militarize their border in present time. And then you have Mexico, who isn't really a military threat. Most of the threat or the defensive posture comes from immigration. So America is essentially at peace on all sides, but can project themselves in all directions. So during World War II, they sold weapons to everybody, both sides in Europe. They were fighting each other, and there was a lot of fighting being done because Europeans specialized in being able to destroy themselves whenever they wish. So World War II was just such an occasion for them to destroy themselves, and they purchased vast military hardware from the United States, and a lot of these transactions were done in gold. So after these European nations had beaten themselves up and bombed themselves into oblivion, they looked up and they realized that America had 70% of the world's gold. And at that time, everything ran, not everything, but a vast majority of the world's currencies ran on the gold standard, meaning you had gold in a vault that backed up your currency. Therefore, your currency had value based on the gold in your vault. So America had 70% of the world's gold. And so they essentially called everybody and installed the Bretton Woods system, as some people call it, at the Bretton Woods Conference or Convention, as some other people like to call it. So they organized, I think it was 44 original nations into this convention, to this conference, and they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new set of rules that are going to be how we're going to govern the world. Because you have to remember, whenever you govern the world, you have to have three key things. And this is something Africans need to study more. Africans in diaspora, Africans on the continent, they need to understand empire building, power dynamics. These are the things that need to be studied and understood, because eventually when you get your shot to rule, you want to know what you're doing. So now you have, in order to rule the world, not just your nation or be a strong nation in a strong region, but in order to rule the world, you need three things. And these three things are recurrent in almost every global world order. You have to have a global military presence or a global military force. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to have a trade network that spans the entire globe. And then you have to have a currency that's good all over the world, right? So you need a trade network, a global trade network, a global military order, as well as a currency. And so after World War II at Bretton Woods, America sought to set this up, and they did set it up. They set up a system where the dollar would be pegged to gold and all other currencies would be pegged to the dollar. And we still, by that, follow that tradition where, so for example, if I drop you in the middle of Mali and I give you 100,000 of any currency of your choice, you're probably going to want dollars. You're not going to want money from Thailand or Turkmenistan or Syria. You're going to want $100,000 worth of USD, because no matter what, people will accept that because that's the global medium of trade at present. And there are some reasons why, and we'll get into those in just a moment. So now America went ahead and established the dollar as the world's trade median. Next, there was the World Trade Organization, the IMF, the World Bank. These things were set up in order to facilitate world trade within the American empire, if you will, within the sphere of the American power system. And then next you had a military order, which was NATO. NATO emerged as the hard power component within the Bretton Woods system. So NATO initially was a bunch of pretty sophisticated militaries that came together and said, we're going to follow America, and if you have problems with America, or any of us for that matter, you're going to have a serious headache on your hands, because these nations were essentially a global military fighting force. Mm-hmm. So you see, America, it's not just the dollar or America saying so, it's a complete system. And a system is nothing but people acting through thought, speech, and action towards a shared goal. So whenever you have a bunch of people acting within a group or in separate places all over the world towards a shared goal through thought, speech, or action, that's a system. So in order to rule the world, what you need is a system. You have to have a system to rule the world. If you want to become the next boss, you need an accompanying system. So within the Western world, there was, I believe, the Dutch, and then the British, and now the American, within pretty recent history, if you want to go back a couple hundreds of years. So now there was something that happened. There were people. All right, now let's not make it seem like everything was just smooth sailing for America. There were people who didn't like America's dominance and the fact that the world's currency was linked to a nation, and this linkage gave that nation particular advantages over other nations. So, for example, if we look back in history, we see Charles de Gaulle had great issues and problems with the fact that the dollar was the world's reserve. Him and his finance minister allegedly made their grievances known. There were certain phrases that they would come up with. And there's little news coverage on this, but there was a time when there were money was loaded up onto a battleship and brought over to New York, and dollars were forcefully demanded and exchanged for gold, their equivalent of gold, in the 70s. And so Richard Nixon, because what happened is the dollar began to, and you have to, a lot of people in America don't understand. If you've never left America, you don't understand the position that the dollar actually occupies. Most of the world's dollars, most of the world's $100 bills, about 70% of them, aren't actually in America. Most of the world's dollar bills are everywhere else, right?
Right.
Most of the world's $100 bills, about 70% of the world, only about 30% of the world's $100 bills, Benjamins, are actually in America. The rest are all over the world being used.
That makes sense, because I know when I go to Nigeria, and I need to exchange Naira for dollars or dollars for Naira. They have a whole stack, and all they take is $100 bills. Like they take 100, brand new 100. That's all they want, and that's all over Africa. They want the brand new $100 bills. They might take a 50, but anything less than 50, sometimes they won't even touch it. But
they don't touch it.
They want the brand new $100.
50 is even, you're asking for a lot with a $50 bill as well. Right. So 50 is even. So now you're understanding that the primacy that the dollar occupies within the world system. Now, if we go back to 1971, August 1971, I believe, you had more people using the dollar, so many dollars in circulation, that the price of gold per dollar was consistently dropping because you just had too many, the dollar became too popular. You had too many people using the dollar, and you just didn't have enough. You just didn't have enough gold to back up the number of dollars that were in circulation. So certain nations, I know that France, Charles de Gaulle made the request and said, hey, I'm going to need gold for these dollars. So a lot of nations started making bank runs, if you will, saying, yeah, these dollars are depreciating. I'd rather just have my gold, please. So what Richard Nixon did is he decoupled the value of gold from the dollar. And some people said that this was the destruction of the Bretton Woods system, but that's just simply not correct. Because even if the financial component of the Bretton Woods system disappears, you still have the trade arrangements and the military component of the Bretton Woods system. Another thing to remember is that America is a sea power, right? So America has a very large navy. So America essentially ensures end-to-end trade. So America became the police of the seas, if you will. So if you want to trade all over the world, you didn't have to have your navy escorting merchant vessel ships all over the world. America had essentially stepped in. So it's very easy to use America's system as well as their currency. And if there was a problem, America's army and via NATO would settle any problems. So it was a complete system, and it might not be perfect, but it's the only serious system of the last 100 years, if you want to look back at it. So now in 1971, around August, Richard Nixon, based on the problems that the dollar was having, at being that it was the world's trade medium, he decoupled the value of it from gold entirely. And so now it was floating. But around the same time, actually later on, but within the same time period in history, there were certain agreements made that so for example, coffee, gold, oil. Coffee, gold, and oil, all of those are priced in dollars. And so certain transactions, for example, in oil, so there was some diplomacy with Saudi Arabia and between America and Saudi Arabia, where the agreement was you guys will transact your oil sales in dollars, and anybody who wants to buy oil from you will first purchase dollars and then from there purchase oil. So essentially, you had the emergence of what some people called the petrodollar, meaning that the dollar was no longer valuable because it was backed by gold, but it was valuable because most of the world's oil transactions were done in the dollar. So now you had certain nations like Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is one of the bedrock nations of OPEC. So once Saudi Arabia kind of goes this way, all the other exporting nations, oil exporting nations, Nigeria, Libya, Gabon, all the other oil nations scattered around Africa and just in the periphery of Africa, they essentially follow the way of Saudi Arabia. Now gold was valuable, or the dollar was valuable, not because it was connected to gold as it was in the past, but it was valuable because most of the oil transactions were done in gold, and oil is the bedrock of many economies. And so now if you have oil like Russia, which is a large nation, you have to get dollars, which helps strengthen a nation that you're perpetually in a cold war with. You have to get their currency, you have to strengthen their currency in order for your economy to run. So now, or if you decide to buy oil, you have to, for example, China, I believe, is the number one purchaser of fossil fuels on the planet. I believe oil and gas. And then you have Russia, which is the third nation. So if Russia wants to do transactions with China, Russia now has to get dollars and China has to get dollars. And they're both strengthening America while at the same time being in this clandestine war with the same nation that they're helping to strengthen. Now, there was a time when if you said that you were going to not do this and you were going to, for example, like Saddam Hussein decided, you were going to transact your oil sales in euros or another currency, that might just mean that somebody is going to show up at your doorstep with aircraft carriers and there's going to be regime change and a call for democracy in your nation.
A call for democracy. That's right.
So democracy. You didn't necessarily want to deviate from the beaten path, if you will, because you might have problems, even if what you're coming with. So you look at somebody like Libya's former leader who was taken out, Muammar Gaddafi, and what he was trying to do with his oil and depart from being reliant on making transactions of oil with the dollar. It was interesting. It might have been in his best benefit to do those things. However, the person that you're going against has a complete system. You're just some guy in North Africa with some oil to sell that's going against the world's superpower. So regardless of what you may think or believe, you're not strong enough to challenge the system that you're challenging. And if you do that, there's going to be serious repercussions, because the world's prevailing system is the world's prevailing system, and it doesn't really care about how you feel. It only cares about whether you have enough power to actually alter its power. So that was the problem with Gaddafi. So
got a quick question in the chat room. Oh man, I kind of want to hold it to after we get.
Go ahead, now throw it in there. So I'll put a pin in what we were talking about.
All right, which leads to the question: how will African Americans survive in America once the economy tanks due to the U.S. dollar depreciating? See, I've heard varying views on this. I've heard that like the U.S. dollar, British pound, euro, they're not going anywhere. But like all these other currencies are gonna just disappear one day for the most part because it's so weak. Like the Naira, you see what's going on with the SETI in Ghana. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's the thing, right? And here's what's coming to get you if you're not ready in America. I'll just focus on America, and I'm going to talk to a lot of our people out here in America, the Africans that are out here, the indigenous African Americans that are out here. At the end of the day, there are two things that are coming to get you. You got gentrification and you got inflation, right? And America is eventually going to become a nation where it's about skills. So if you don't have a skill, if you don't have a trade, right? If you didn't go to school and get a STEM degree, at this point, your degree is useless if it's not science, technology, engineering, math, medicine. It's not within one of those categories. You don't have a skill, right? You can be skilled through a degree and you can be skilled through a trade. Now, if you're skilled through a trade, you have carpentry, you have plumbing, you have electrical work, you have those hard skills that, so for example, if you're a mechanic has a skill. A lot of people don't understand the difference between a job and a career, right? So a job is something that once you're fired from that job, you're no longer that thing, right? So now if you're a secretary, you answer phones and you take notes. That's a job. Once you're fired from there, you didn't really take any skills. You didn't really bring any skills. But let's say you know how to change out a transmission. Let's say you know how to swap out an engine. These are skills. These are things that the average person on the street can't do. So if you're a mechanic at garage A and you get fired from garage A, you're still a mechanic. If you're a nurse at hospital A and you get fired, you're still a nurse. All you need are the tools of your trade in order to transact your trade. That's why if you're ever on a plane and they say, hey, is there a doctor on board? You're not going to say, well, I haven't clocked in. I'm technically not a doctor. You're going to say, yes, I'm a doctor. No matter where I go, I carry these skills of being a doctor. That's what a career means. You can't be fired from a career. A career is something that you are. It's like a status. Once you become a surgeon, a gifted neurosurgeon, all you need are the tools of the trade in order to practice your trade. Once you're an attorney, all you need to do is take a look at the laws in that particular jurisdiction and know how they apply, when they apply, and why they apply. If you're a nurse, if you pass out in your living room and let's say there are 3 nurses there who are off duty, you're a very lucky person.
Right.
So these are the things that if you're going to be in a country like America that's going through dynamic change, inflation, gentrification, different things are happening. You need a trade and you need or you need a skill. So the thing is, America is going to drift towards a nation like the rest of the world where you have haves and have-nots. The average price of a home in America is nearing $400,000. There was a time in 1993, 92, 94, the average home price was around $100,000, $120,000. You're talking about 25, almost 30 years later, that's gone up 4 times. And it doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. So if you're listening to me right now and you don't have a skill or a trade, it's going to be very difficult because a lot of the soft jobs are going to be disappearing or they're going to be very devalued. And you're going to realize that the money that you make, even if they raise minimum wage, simply won't be enough to really get you anything. You're going to be working just to survive. And there are many people in the developing world who are working just to survive. So as a nation's prosperity maybe wanes or is shaken or alters, the people who are going to feel it the most are the people who are at the precipice, the people who haven't. So for example, I always tell people in your 30s, you want to try and double your income every 3 years if you can. If you can, try. That should be your goal. Because by your 40s, you might not have that same energy and drive, and you're going to want to sit on your laurels a little bit. So you want to go ahead and try to do that. So it's not about necessarily hoping that the country is going to be okay as a whole. What it's about is saying, you know what, am I prepared for these challenges that are going to come? Because you need to be prepared for that. I personally suggest owning where you work, but typically you have to have a skill to do that. In order to own where you work, you have to have a skill. It might be easy for me as an attorney to say, You know, own where you work, but if you have a skill, if you're a carpenter, if you're a plumber, if you're an electrician, if you have your CDL, any of these things, you can form a company, get contracts allocated to that company. Like the rapper Nasir Jones said, start a company, run it, and sign yourself. That's a major key. So essentially, you should be looking to do that, because depending on an employer to take care of you in a harsh environment like this might not be the wisest decision. So that's for everybody. That's for the Africans, African Americans, whatever you want to consider yourself as here. Anybody with this melanated skin, it's gonna get rough for those people who don't prepare for the roughness. Make sure you got yourself a skill. Make sure you got yourself a trade. If you're lucky, own where you work. And then it's grind time. Just understand that things are going to get worse for other people. And God willing, they won't get worse for you if you prepare.
Guys, hit that like button again. Please hit the like button as you come to the chat room again. Hit the like button. Now, go ahead, Ebube.
All right. So that little aside, hopefully.
That was perfectly well done. Well said.
So we'll get back to geopolitics. So in regards to geopolitics, America essentially had a system, the Bretton Woods system. They set that up. And then you had the emergence of what some people call the petrodollar, where all transactions in oil buying or selling was done in the dollar. System that America brought along with it. And so what still good?
Yeah, you sound good.
Perfect. And so now when we fast forward till today, the system that came about in the 70s with the emergence of what some people call the petrodollar, and you have to remember that, because if you make the mandate that every transaction in oil has to be done in your currency, that now pulls you into oil politics. So now you might have to intervene in the Middle East more than you thought you would, because that's where a lot of the oil is. So now you're intervening in regions. And so the petrodollar, to an extent, put America in a position where there were certain situations that America had to engage themselves in order to enforce the mandate that they promulgated. So now we fast forward to today, and we have Russia. And we have to remember what Russia lost. So, for example, the problem with Russia is that Russia has no real natural borders. It's flat land, and it's just too expensive for Russia to protect their borders. That's why Russia always wanted to anchor themselves against natural borders, like the mountains that run through Romania all the way up to Poland. So if you think back to World War II, Russia essentially pushed themselves all the way into Eastern Germany. So that if you wanted to attack Germany, you had to go through Russia. If you wanted to attack Russia, you had to go through Germany, Lithuania, or Ukraine, or Belarus, or one of the Caucasus nations before you got to the Russian heartland, which sits on the European plain, which is very hard to defend. So the Ukraine essentially began stockpiling weapons that threatened the Russian heartland. So Russia was recently, they had no other choice. They had to invade, because within a certain period of time, Russia's main advantage is they got a bunch of tanks. They have more tanks than the rest of Europe combined, just about. So they're the land power. If Russia rolls a bunch of tanks into your land, there's a problem. And the Ukraine began getting long-range missiles, drones from Turkey, autonomous weapons systems, different things of that nature. So within a certain period of time, they were going to be strong enough to counteract Russia directly into the Russian heartland, especially if they join NATO. So Russia said, well, I can't let you join NATO and permanently be a threat. Right at my throat, I'm going to invade and push all the way to, there's a river that runs through the middle of the Ukraine. Russia's main objective is to take over everything up to that river, because there's only 3 or 4 main crossing points, which creates a natural barrier. If you want to invade, you have to go across one of those three to four choke points, if you will, that are very easy to defend. So Russia said, all right, if you're going to join the other side, we got to put a stop to this. And so Russia invaded, and after they invaded, America and other nations put on sanctions on Russia. They went ahead and removed Russia from the SWIFT system. And if you understand the SWIFT system and American banking, a lot of nations around the world, whether they're friendly with America or not, they use the American infrastructure.
Right.
It's just really good. It's really easy to transact in dollars. If Canada wants to do business with Malaysia, they don't want Canadian dollars, and Canada certainly doesn't want Malaysia's currency. They're going to agree to make the transaction happen in dollars. And America also has the infrastructure. You have the SWIFT network. So you can essentially wire dollars very easily between nations and transactions. So America, some people have alleged that America has weaponized this system and that America has made it, they've politicized it. But at the end of the day, power is power. Why not? If I have the advantage and you need my system and I cut you off from that system, I'm well within my right because you're my enemy. You shouldn't be able to, it's like as a little kid, if you had the basketball at the court and you owned it, you could take your ball and go home if you didn't like what was going on.
Right.
So America essentially has the ball in their court, if you will. And so America stopped Russia from being able to use these systems. Now that's opened up an interesting door because America has essentially done to Russia what Charles de Gaulle was hoping for, what Saddam Hussein was looking to do, what Gaddafi was looking to do. They were looking to detach themselves from America's financial system. And in one swoop, the president of America has essentially given Russia what these other people, these other leaders had tried to do in the past. Because before, to deviate from the American financial system almost could be looked at as an act of war. And in fact, it would bring about something called regime change. So now America has essentially given Russia the opportunity and has said, hey, listen, we're going to cut you off from the American system. So now at this point, it's up to Russia to either sink or swim. But at the same time, Russia, they're the number 3 oil and gas exporter, and China is the number 1 purchaser. So now China also has a system that rivals the SWIFT system. It's not used by as many nations, but they've decided that they're going to have their own system, which is actually pretty wise because, and this is something that a lot of African nations simply don't recognize. At the end of the day, if you really want power, and let's remember what power is. Power is 2 things. Power is 2 things. And this is a definition that I personally created, but I believe that it applies to every situation. Power is knowing what you want. And it's having the ability to do that. So now let's say I'm hungry. And not the nation, but the status. I'm actually hungry. I'm famished. And I decide that I want to satisfy that hunger. And I go to my fridge and I see there's a sandwich there. I have the ability to eat the sandwich. Mm-hmm. So I know that I'm hungry. I know that I want the sandwich and I have the ability to consume that sandwich. Therefore, I have the power to satisfy my hunger. So power is a 2-fold analysis. It's knowing what you want, because if you don't even know what you want, you can't even come to the table discussing power dynamics because you don't even know what you want. If I gave you what you needed, you wouldn't recognize it because you don't even know what you need. So the first thing is knowledge. There's a knowledge component to it. The next component is ability. After knowing what you want, do you have the ability to get there? Like we talked about, the economy is getting rough. You want to be a millionaire. You might know that you want to be a millionaire, but do you have the ability to get to the point where you're considered a millionaire? That's the real question. So now power is knowing what you want, having the ability to get there. Now, when it comes to being a world power, you have to come with an accompanying system. In that system, there's 3 things: a military order, a trade order, and a global currency. Now, China has been playing around with potentially being the next world power. That's something that they discuss within their nation, and that's something that they're actually gunning for. Now, they may get it, they may not, but if we're just going to look at it objectively, they're the next up, if you will.
Right.
So they potentially could reach that position, but nothing is set in stone. So they've already taken certain concrete steps to make sure that they're independent of certain other nations that they may have to depend on, which further would reduce their power. So they're building a system that they have internally just in case the world system decides to shut them out.
Which is smart.
Which is very smart. So now they're extending that system to Russia and saying, okay, the West is shutting you out of their system. Here's an opportunity for you to create your own system and get your own power where you don't have to depend on the SWIFT system or the transaction of oil through dollars. That's why Russia came out and said that the transactions that they're going to take for their currency is going to be, for their oil is going to be in their currency.
Right.
Now, they were able to make that statement because they're already in a proxy war with the West via Ukraine. Now, for an African nation, now when we turn to Africa, if we look at the last African nation to make such a declaration, it didn't go so well in Libya. It actually went very poorly in Libya. Shout outs to Brandon. Mm-hmm. Brandon's always everywhere. Shout outs to Pan-Africanism Strikes Back. Y'all go check out his channel. So we look at what happened in Africa. We look at Gaddafi, but Gaddafi militarily was very weak. He had a very weak military, very low population. And so when they decided that they wanted to invade his nation crumbled in a matter of weeks. Right. There was very little resistance. So we look at Russia. Russia isn't one of those type of nations. They're strong enough to be able to stand on their own so far. And if we look at their war effort in the Ukraine at present, it's not going as they thought. They really wanted to split the Ukraine in two and make it landlocked by taking over the coast, completely cutting them off via Crimea, going left, going right, cutting them off from the sea, and then pushing all the way to I believe the Dnieper River, or the river that bifurcates Ukraine. And then from there, potentially declaring the peace that would benefit Moscow. But Russia has failed in regards to logistics. Many of their tanks simply haven't even gotten to the battlefield. They're having logistical errors where they have troops moving ahead of the resources of the troops. The troops get out there, they run out of weapons, they run out of food. So Russia has really exposed the fact that they're not the Soviet Union of 30 years ago that could wage a successful war within a matter of weeks. They're very they're rusty, if you will, but they had no choice. But at the same time, they're a nation that militaristically you have to respect. So now when it comes to African nations potentially saying, you know what, let's transact oil transactions, gold transactions, other transactions in our currency, it's kind of a wait and see, because they have to wait and see, okay, Russia has left the American mandate, or America has removed them from the mandate, if you will. How is this going to go for Russia? How are they going to create, is it going to be a multipolar system where America has a system, Russia has a system, China has a system, and you can choose which system that you want to entertain as a nation? Or is it going to be the same old where the mandate that oil transactions have to be done in the dollar? So we're at an interesting point for African nations, because no African nation is strong enough to the point to make the moves, and there's not a military situation ongoing where there's already a quasi war, because making such a declaration is essentially an act of war.
All right, guys, hit the like button again. Please hit the like button. So I guess, okay, Philip Lindsay in the chat room, he has a comment. He said the Ukraine game is about forcing the EU, European Union, and Japan and the US dollar. Hold on. Lost the comment. And Japan and the US dollar based system is going to fail. What are your thoughts on that comment?
Could you repeat the question for me, please?
The Ukraine game is about forcing the EU and Japan in the US dollar-based system is going to fail.
Well, not necessarily. The main thing that the Ukraine is doing is this. Russia, essentially, you got to realize Russia at one point controlled Eastern Europe. Controlled it, dominated the politics of Eastern Europe all the way into Germany. That's a very powerful state. And every state wants to get back their power. Turkey today is trying to revive the power and glory they had as the Ottoman Empire. Mussolini used to run around talking about the glory of Rome. Mongols, they build giant statues of Genghis Khan everywhere. Every nation wants to bring back the greatness of their nation. So you have Russia. Russia has decided, the elites of Russia have decided that Russia can only exist one way, either as a superpower or not at all. Now, you have to understand the geopolitics, and geopolitics is geography and politics. Russia, for example, sits on the Great European Plain in the heartland of Russia. 2/3 of its population sit on a very flat land that shares many borders, and it's militarily in the worst position ever. It's flat land that can't be defended. It's almost as if, let's say, Canada became America's #1 enemy. That would be a very bad thing for America, because look how flat and long the border is between Canada and America. You'd have to militarize it every 5 miles. The price of defending the American border against Canada would be ridiculous. And imagine if Canada started building long-range missiles along the border. It might come to a point where you say, you know what, for American survival, Canada has to be invaded because the government that's there is doing too much. We need a friendly nation at our borders. So an invasion is going to happen. Essentially, the same concept is happening with the Ukraine. The border that they share, you have to remember that these nations were once part of a nation. And so they didn't really need to think defensively when they created all these borders. If you've ever been to DC, DC is like a diamond that sits at the top of Virginia, but inside of Maryland. Imagine if Maryland all of a sudden became a hostile nation to America. They literally surround DC. It would be very hard to defend an attack from Maryland into the District of Columbia. So now America might just decide, you know what, it's time to invade Maryland if Maryland decided to take the posture of having an adverse military position to the United States.
Right.
It's the same concept in Ukraine. The Ukraine decided that Russia was too big of a threat and that they wanted to have the protection of NATO in order to be able to stand up against Russia, because they felt that Russia eventually would want to exert control over all of Eastern Europe, starting with Ukraine. So they like the Balkan, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, those nations up there that used to be former Soviet republics, decided that they wanted to go ahead and link up with NATO so that they would get protection from NATO. So Ukraine decided to go the same way, as well as some nations in the Caucasus they want to become members. They haven't yet, but that's their goal. And so Russia said enough is enough. Russia said that they're not going to have these type of enemies on their border. Therefore, they're going to go ahead and invade. And invading prompted the world to do certain things, certain sanctions. Certain people have accused America of using their currency. And you have to remember, the vast majority of international trade is done with the dollar. And so when America cuts you off from dollars, it really hurts, because everybody is expecting dollars from you. That's just what it is. So sanctions, when people hear of sanctions, a lot of people think sanctions aren't a big deal. Sanctions are a very big deal. Sanctions really harm nations, especially if they're coming from America and its Western allies.
Right.
So now, but sanctions also are a chance to grow. Because if I say that, so for example, if I tell you that you can't come into my business, we don't accept your type here, and now you have to go and replicate whatever business I have within your community, that might not be such a bad thing if you can actually pull it off. You might actually be able to obtain self-sufficiency. So now the real test is for Russia to see, okay, you've been cut off. What system can you create towards your self-sufficiency and survival? Because whatever system you can create, there's a lot of nations that are watching. Because a lot of nations sit on the side and watch the great powers do what they do. A lot of nations in Africa, a lot of nations in Asia, a lot of nations in South America, they sit back and say, okay, if Russia does this and I merely do what Russia does and it gives me a little bit of autonomy, well, then you can't really complain because I'm merely doing what Russia's doing. And if Russia has a system that adequately can bring in other members, well, then I might deviate and go with Russia's system. And then there may be some back channel deals that I can work out with Russia for protection. It's always the threat of a new system emerging is that people will go with that new system. And so when people go with that new system, the old system is truly going to be the loser because in order for the old system to lose power, people have to lose faith in it. And you have to remember that these systems are almost like religions. The reason that if I started the Church of Zeus or the Church of Hera or Athena, it would be very difficult is because nobody believes in those systems, those religious systems anymore. They would just look at you as a quack. So you couldn't have, it'd be hard to generate power or resources through the Church of Athena because nobody believes in those religious systems. It's like that with any system. If there's another competing system that comes along and they remove followers from your particular system, and if they remove enough followers from your system, you got to remember a system is merely made up of people who engage in thought, speech, and action towards a shared goal. Now, if I remove those people and put them into my system, they no longer are working towards your shared goal. They're working towards my shared goal. So African nations are waiting on the side, taking a look, because if there are options, then there are going to be choices. If there are choices, then people are going to choose.
Guys, again, hit that like button. Hit the like button. Now, I guess if we could jump into the Naira, the Petro Naira.
All right.
And then after that, guys, we'll take a couple questions after that. So, but go ahead, Ebube.
All right. So when it comes to the Petro Naira, what it would take for Nigeria. So, for example, we'll just focus on Nigeria because Nigeria is one of the leading oil exporters in Africa. So when it comes to Nigeria saying, you know what we're going to do, and it wouldn't necessarily be a Petro Naira, because what a Petro Naira would essentially entail is Nigeria saying to every nation that either buys or sells oil, you have to buy or sell that oil with the Naira.
I don't see a problem with it. I don't see it. I mean,
well, you have to have a system to enforce that. Because what if a nation says no? What are you going to do? You see, it's always the or else, right? The great or else. When you have a system with the three things that we discussed earlier, a world trade network, a global currency, and a global military order, if I tell you that you need to use this currency within this trade network, or else you're going to see this global military order, well, then you know what to do. So there's a system that needs to accompany it. So now what it would most likely pragmatically be would be Nigeria saying, okay, what we're going to do, what we can control within our system is saying, if you want to buy oil from Nigeria, you have to exchange your currency, purchase Naira, and then purchase our oil and gas. Now, that would be great for Nigeria because then you would strengthen the Naira and there would be a sort of consistency, if you will. However, the problem is you have to ask what is oil and gas currently being transacted in Nigeria? What currency is currently being transacted in Nigeria at present?
All right.
And then you have the dollar. So now the question is, do you want to run afoul of the nation that is mandated that you use the dollar for petroleum transactions? Do you really want to run afoul of that particular nation when we look at nations like Libya that have done that? You look at nations like Saddam Hussein that have made such declarations, and you see how that ended for those nations.
Right.
However, we see a nation like Russia and China saying that, yeah, we're no longer going to use the dollar. But you have to realize Russia and China are in a certain position that they may be able to have that leverage. So the first thing is, what leverage in your nation do you have to deviate from the world's global system in order to instill the system that you want?
Right. Guys, so what we'll do, we'll open up the lines. If you guys like to call in, click on the link. Again, click on the link. Link is in the chat room. And go ahead and call in. You can add to the conversation. But okay, so say Nigeria goes to the Petro Naira and countries refuse to buy from Nigeria. Okay, they just refuse to buy from Nigeria. So are you saying it's a situation where, okay, we won't buy from you, we'll just go buy from somewhere else? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you have to ask how many somewhere else's are there. So let's say, for example, that, all right, so now Western Europe is woefully dependent on Russia for oil and gas. Russia is almost like an African nation in regards to how much it depends on its resource portfolio. So now, so here's the problem with Europe, for example. We'll just focus on Europe buying oil from Nigeria. So now, Western Europe, because of all the oil and gas infrastructure and that was set up during the Soviet era, they get about 45% of their oil and gas from Russia.
All right.
And so now they're going to threaten them with sanctions. And so we're going to put sanctions on you, but I'm still going to come to your convenience store to shop, right? So now let's say you say, I'm going to put sanctions on Target or Walmart, but you go there every week for your groceries. How effective are those sanctions? So now you're going to look for other people to purchase from. You're going to say, well, I'm going to go to Publix, I'm going to go to Kroger, but you have to make sure that the infrastructure at Publix or Kroger is set up to be able to handle the amount of business that's coming there, because you can't replace Walmart with a bodega.
What about if you place it with a bunch of bodegas?
Exactly, right? So, but you see where the problem is. So you have to have the infrastructure ready. So let's say Nigeria is planning on having the infrastructure ready, especially when it comes to gas, because there's a pipeline looking to go through the Sahara. However, because of the banditry situation in the Sahara, it may be difficult to run a pipeline. It may be difficult to run a pipeline from southeastern Nigeria through north central Nigeria, through northwestern Nigeria, into Niger, and then ultimately into Libya or Algeria, and then into Morocco, and then into Europe. That may be difficult because the Sahara is largely ungoverned. However, there's pipelines being built along the coast. So now once those pipelines are complete, oil or gas per se, not oil, will be able to be delivered directly to Western Europe. Mm-hmm. At that point, if Nigeria says, you know what we're going to do, and this is where regional currency comes in, because part of the oil, part of the gas is going to come from Senegal. Senegal has huge offshore deposits, between Senegal and Mauritania. I believe they're still working out who actually owns it, because of course, if you know those two nations, they're right next to each other, and oil doesn't necessarily settle, particularly in one nation as opposed to the other. It's just kind of scattered everywhere. Then everybody kind of fights to say, no, this is my border. No, 10 miles up is my border because there's $30 billion worth of oil in this 10-mile stretch. So we'll do boundary adjustments. But let's say once the infrastructure comes on stream that's currently being developed. So now you have gas deposits in, for example, Nigeria, parts of southeastern Nigeria, parts of southwestern Nigeria, and the Niger Delta. And you have these pipelines running all the way into Europe. If Nigeria, for example, says, you know what we're going to do is we're going to mandate that these fossil fuels be transacted in Naira, they would be able to potentially at least dictate their own transactions. Now, for them to tell Spain or any other nation, any place that you buy gas in the world needs to be conducted in Naira, you need a system. It's only a nation that has a system that can tell two independent nations that even though this transaction doesn't involve my nation, you better use dollars. Why? Because I said so, right? Because I have a global military order that may just come knocking at your door, but you don't want that. Let's all maintain peace. So you see that in order to enforce it on other nations, you need a system. However, within your own nation, you have a higher likelihood or probability to be able to enforce a decree to tell people that if you want to come purchase from us, you have to use our currency. However, if you look at Saddam Hussein, he made that declaration and it didn't go well for him. You look at Muammar Gaddafi, he also made that declaration. He said, you have to buy my resources with gold. And he was dragged out of a crate or a tube, and what happened to him happened to him. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about making a declaration, it's having a system that can at least defend what you say.
All right, we got Brandon. I'll go ahead and mute yourself, Brandon. And guys, we're not gonna take any more callers. We got 5 people in queue, so we're gonna get through these 5. So go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, so when you look at the comments, you really become aware of the lack of scope when it comes to Black people, especially on YouTube. The reason why the U.S. controls all the oil based on a dollar, that's not just because of military power. The reason why all these countries have a U.S. dollar reserve currency, that's not just because of military power. That's because of stability. When you look at Russia, aside from 3 cities, Russia is pretty much a third world country. You go outside of Moscow, 5 miles, you have people living in, it looks like they're in the 1890s, okay? China, once you get outside of Beijing and its major centers, China is still largely an agricultural society. People digging up dirt with old school hoes with sticks attached to blades, right? So when people talk about, oh, Russia's going to take over, China's going to take over, in order to become the world superpower and replace the United States, there's a certain level of stewardship that's necessary for the rest of the world. When African countries talk about, oh, we should be independent. Oh, this would be best for this country, Nigeria, whatever. The United States is probably the only reason why your leaders haven't sold you out worse than they have, because they're afraid of United States sanctions on one or both parties. So they have to act responsibly when it comes to global economics. The United States has a pretty good system that benefits people in a lot of ways. One of the major backers of the United States system is the United States middle class. We always dismiss the middle class. We only consider governments. Governments don't make countries. People do. United States has better people, more hardworking, more honest, have more integrity, and are willing to work to get things done. African countries have a bunch of people complaining about leaders that they refuse to do anything about, but they think that somehow if the United States gets removed as the world power, their countries are going to suddenly become utopias of economics and technological advancement. Russia doesn't want to rule the world. China doesn't want to run the world. They're nationalists. They just want their country to be okay. They don't want to worry about a flood in Kenya. They don't want to worry about earthquake in Zimbabwe, which I don't think they'll have an earthquake there. They don't want to fix natural disasters and help people in the world when stuff goes wrong. They want to take care of their country. Oh, you're having a revolution? We'll sell you some guns. We'll sell you some drones. We'll sell you all this stuff. And I believe that a lot of us don't truly understand that. They don't understand the safety net that the United States provides for the world, not because of empathy, but because of the interest of capitalism. That's why capitalism is the best system in the history of the planet, because it will make great nations intervene in the affairs of smaller nations for the better, in the interest of protecting their assets and their interests. Russia is not going to intervene because of economics in Angola. They're either going to take something from you or sell you something. China is the same way. You can't complain about China being in Africa and then out the other side of your mouth talk about, ooh, man, I'm on the side of Russia and China over the United States. United States is not in Africa exploiting your resources for pennies on the dollar. In some aspects they are, but for the most part, the United States has left Africa, man. They get a little bit of stuff over there. They help with some counterterrorism stuff, but for the most part, they're not really trying to interfere with African affairs like that. It's better to have the country that's going to let you, give you room to grow on your own than depend on a country that's like, I don't want to be involved with these people at all, but if I see something, I'll take it. Russia cannot even police the world like how America does. China can't even police the world like America does. Russia can't even handle situations 100 miles outside of their border. But you guys are like, oh, the United States is going to go down and these people will rise up in their place. It's going to result to chaos. The world will be even more of a dangerous place. And African countries, it'll just be dystopian because their leaders will go crazy with loans and selling the people out for their own personal gains and with no U.S. sanctions and all that. And it would just be bad. Let's be real about who we are as a people and what our countries are like.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot. That was a lot. What's good with you, Brandon? How you been, man?
I'll be real good until black folks start talking about economics. Global economics. Not you, Ebube. You know what you're talking about. But just people in the audience like, dude, this is not a game of checkers, man. This is real life. Like, people got to eat and stuff. You know, people got families to feed. And I say there's a ton of black people in America. So I think all black people should side with America because we have a large population here. You don't barely got no black people in China, and you barely got no black people in Russia. What common sense black person will want those places to take over when all our people are in the Western Hemisphere and in Africa? It doesn't make sense.
Well, when we talk about takeover, we have to understand that when we talk about a takeover, it's a system, right? And people have to see a system and either join in because it's in their best interest or alternatively because they have no choice, right? So now, let's say you grew up in a neighborhood where there's a certain power structure where this guy essentially runs the block. Now, regardless of how you feel about that guy, he runs the neighborhood. And his organization, his system, the people who engage in thought, speech, and action to maintain that particular person's power, they run the neighborhood. Now, the only way for them not to run that neighborhood is if there's a competing system that emerges. It makes more sense for you to join that particular competing system as opposed to staying within the system that's already in your neighborhood. So America has come with the only serious system of the last 75 years. Now, there have been other systems, but America's system is just the easiest system to join into. And they've made it that way. And they've made it easy to join into. So most of the world has joined into the American system. However, in case you don't want to join the American system, there's a hard power component of that system that may potentially come along and change your mind.
Ebube, let me ask you one question. Africans from Africa, globally, African Americans globally, where are we getting more of our money? Russia, China, or America in the West?
In regards to global trade or just...
Listen, the Nigerian guy who sends his kid to school to be a doctor in America and then work at, Cedar Sinai. The guy who sends his kid to Oxford University from Uganda to become a engineer. Africans are running west. They're not running a Russia.
Well, the thing is this. Well, here's the thing. You have to remember that we live in a multipolar. When it comes to economics, we live in a multipolar world. So, for example, I was born in Nigeria. I left as a small kid to come to America for the educational benefits, which I hope have paid off. Now, when it comes to economics and making money, for example, almost 60, 70% of Nigeria's forex comes from this oil. and most of that oil is sold to India and China. So, for example, Nigeria's largest trading partners are India and China. So it makes most of its money with India and China when it comes to dollars, because the oil is transacted in dollars, because China and India will bring dollars in order to purchase Nigerian oil. So you're still within the American system because you're using the American system's currency. However, you're not necessarily doing business with America. And that's what a lot of nations have kind of come to and said, wait a minute, we're doing business between ourselves, but we're strengthening America with every transaction. And America might not be the most friendly nation towards those nations. For example, when you look at China and Russia. Now, when it comes to education and culturally, the United States has an advantage because United States higher education is just more respected than Chinese higher education or Russian higher education. But we have to be able to compartmentalize those things, because coming to America for a PhD versus doing 80% of your business with China, those are two very different things.
But that's what I'm saying about, we have to be honest about who we are, bro. Most of the money that Nigeria is getting by doing business through oil with China and India, that's not finding its way to the Nigerian people. Most of the money that's finding its way to the Nigerian people is what? People who are from Nigeria, living in America in the West, sending their families back money in Nigeria. So what we're saying is, corrupt Nigerian government. We're gonna, America's gone now. So now the corrupt Nigerian government is all of a sudden gonna become a model of integrity, honesty, and leadership. And suddenly those oil dollars are gonna start trickling down to the Nigerian people. That doesn't make sense. That's never gonna happen. So what's gonna happen? The United States falls, the Nigerian is gonna get poorer. He's going to get exponentially.
I wouldn't make.
Oh, Brandon, what about if America falls and then the United?
Wait. Hey, gas them up. Yeah, it's, those are very big leaps, because for the American, and we're not going to say America is going to fall. It'd be the American system. So let's say the American system gets replaced, because there was a time when the Dutch had the system. Just think about that. There was a time when the Dutch had the system. Now nobody talks about the Dutch. There was a time when Britain had the system. They controlled 27% of the global landmass. They don't do that anymore, because their system was taken over by the American system. So when you talk about a nation, it's not as if the entire nation is going to fall. No, it's just that nation's ability to project its power globally through a system. And that system has three things: military, trade, and a currency. So now let's say people leave the American system. It doesn't mean that the American system, America as a nation, is going to collapse. Far from it. It just means that certain nations will say, you know what, rather than using the American system, rather than using SWIFT, rather than using the dollar, we're going to use euros, or we're going to use our own currency. It doesn't mean that America as a nation has collapsed. Second, if most African nations, what they really need to focus on, it's not being dependent on another system. What they need to actually focus on is creating their own system internally, because Africa is one of the few continents on the planet that doesn't need any other continent to be okay. So if Africa was put under the conditions that they had to be self-sufficient. So if there were sanctions saying Africans have to be self-sufficient, no foreign interference, Africa might just be better off than it is currently. If there was zero foreign interference in Africa, Africa would actually be better off.
I think we could say that, but when you look at the history of Africa, the leadership of Africa, you guys are just like, in my opinion, Black people in America. We really like selling each other out when there's a dollar to be made, right? We'll kill.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because the thing is, you're looking at these leaders that came from the colonial system forward.
No,
if you wait, Brandon. If you actually understand African history, Africa has had the greatest leaders in human history. If you see some of the feats that were done in Africa, some of the leaders, and I'm not talking about after the European invasion and all these people that were put in power. Those aren't leaders. Those are merely warrant chiefs that were put in power over African people. But if you actually understand African history and know the leaders that we've had, my goodness, I wish we had those leaders of the past today. Some of the leaders, some of the men and women who have led Africa. You have the Meneliks, you have the Queen Aminas, you have
Ebube, I understand the history, but we talking about today, and also Africa has no middle class, and that's
not true. Listen,
but Brandon, I think
Africa is the continent with the fastest growing middle class in the world.
But
to say there's no middle class is really just
well. I mean, I don't mean to interject with both of you. First off, I think when we use the term middle class, we have to be specific, right? So middle class has always been this term that's thrown around in the United States. It really means nothing, because if you ask the average American, they'll tell you that they're middle class, when in all actuality, what are we using to define that metric? Are we talking consumption? Are we talking income? Right. So it's always been this free floating metric. Because I wanted to ask Ebube some questions, but go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. But go ahead. But real quick, I mean, and then also too, you talk middle class here in America. I mean, the goalpost is constantly moving due to inflation. Like middle class here in Atlanta, 3-4 years ago was about, if you're bringing in $60,000 a year, now that's just like 110, 120. So it's just, and then the wages aren't meeting that. So the term middle class, in fact, let's step back for a second. They're getting rid of the middle class here in America.
Of course, because what they've done is they've often confused middle class and middle income. Right. So you'll see a person who's 40-something thousand a year and say, I'm middle class, when they're nowhere near what we might term in terms of consumption the middle class. So that's another double speak, right? This Orwellian double speak that governments like to use to trick people. But
it's not Orwellian double speak, gassed them up. It's you being disingenuous, Dinah's being disingenuous, Ebube being disingenuous. We sitting up here with money talking about America needs to change and we need to go in Russia and China.
I never said that.
Hold on, let me finish. I'm speaking to the broader spectrum. A bunch of dudes sitting in the United States of America, driving luxury cars, bank accounts full of money, are sitting up pontificating about the benefits of another group, another country taking over the global economic, or taking the head of the global economic system. It's just ridiculous, because it's like no one's gonna take care of all these black people on welfare. No one's gonna give all these black women in Section 8. No one's gonna do any of that stuff. So you should be crossing your fingers. No one's going to let a bunch of Nigerians come to their country and send money back in remittance to Nigeria to take care of people who the government doesn't give a shit about. No one's going to let a bunch of Kenyans come over to America, get money, make millions, and run back and insert that back into the African economy. Somebody in the comments said, Brandon doesn't know anything east of Kenya. Lots of Kenyans in China, lots of Africans in China. As soon as COVID broke out, what happened to those people? They were treated like crap, and they were kicked out of the country. You didn't see the United States kicking people out of the country because of COVID. Stop acting like we got some stuff figured out, and somehow this other side, the grass always looks greener on the other side, especially for a black person. You got to look before you leap. We just leap and say stuff, get up here pontificating on just ridiculous ideas. You need America to be strong for Africa to continue to develop, because Africans, who many of whom live in America, African Americans as well, are going to use their money that they generate in America to go fuel the growth of Africa. And if you don't believe that,
but Brandon,
Brandon, hold on, gas them up. What's actually? I'm going to address you by your first name, but when you get on again, let me know your first name. I'm not going to call you gas them up. That's something else. But Brandon,
gas them up is fine. But I wanted to address Brandon's point, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Wait. Let's not interrupt each other. We're all gentlemen here. We'll give each other time to speak. Brandon, I think there's there's some points that are being missed. Now, it's not about, once again, you have to understand, you have to separate the country from the system, right? The Dutch, they controlled the system at one point. They don't control the system anymore. It doesn't mean that their country isn't a great place to be. If anything, they have less poor people than America, even though they don't control the system. You look at Switzerland. Switzerland has less poverty than America, but they don't control the system. So you look at the UK. At the one point, the UK did control the system. They don't control the system anymore. So it's not about a nation falling off and going to rubble and completely disintegrating. No, you have to separate the understanding that there's a system and then there's a nation. And then some nations control the system. It's almost like you have a coach, and then let's say there was a coach named Coach Beatty. When I was in high school, I played football. And Coach Beatty had this West Coast offense, no huddle, high intensity, pass. 90% of the plays were pass plays. And this was in the early 2000s when most people played smash mouth, wing tee football.
Look at Nebraska now.
Yeah, so he essentially had an empty backfield at a time when people were playing smash mouth football. Now, the team that I played for, we were, we almost undefeated every single year. However, that system that he came along with and created, other people are still running with that system till today. I believe Coach Beatty is now a coach in the NFL. I believe for the Colts, I haven't checked up on him in some time, but I believe he's over an offensive coordinator or something like that. Now, he created a system, and if you go to the place where he created that system's still in place. Other people are running it. They're running his system on their different teams. Now, the team that he initially started running that system with, he might not be running with that same team. So now, a nation's system is different than the nation. So now America has a system because of the military order, the World Trade Organization, the World Trade Networks, and then the currency. So now what America has done with Russia is they said, you know what? You can't use our currency. So America has essentially removed them from the system. So now it's up to Russia to say, okay, I'm going to either sink or swim. I either need to create my own system or I need to figure out what I'm doing. So now if Russia creates its own system, what that will mean is that other nations will say, there was a time when if America cut you off from their system, you were finished. But look, America cut Russia off from their system, and China and Russia kind of came up with their own system. Now I might have choices because there's competing systems in the world. Do you understand? For the last 70 years, there was one system. So now what has happened is that now you potentially may have two systems that are both viable. So it's not about who loves you or who doesn't. At the end of the day, every nation needs to be self-sufficient. Every nation needs to be consistently stepping their game up. Every nation needs to be focused on themselves. Every nation needs to make sure that they create systems where they eliminate corruption. If you're not doing that as a nation, well, then it's going to show. Because when I land in the airport, then I drive into your nation, I look around, I'm going to know what type of nation is being, I'm going to know what's going on here. However, on a larger level, this nation now might have options to go with this system or even create their own. So that's the point we're at in the world where for a long time there was one system. For the last 70 years, there was one system. Now there may be a multipolar world order where there's more than one system. Now, being that if that becomes the case, which is highly likely, well, then we have to ask ourselves, well, why can't I create a system the same way I saw China create a system that's now flourishing? Why can't I create a system the same way Russia created a system that's now flourishing? Why can't Africa create a system within ourselves and keep all this wealth and resources within ourselves? Because like I said, Africa is the only continent in the world that if they cut everybody else off, everyone else suffers. And Africa would actually benefit. It's a very interesting position to be in if you can create a system to actually take advantage of that logical fact. So it's not about a nation falling apart or this and that. It's just about the system, competing systems, whose system is going to be supreme. Now, gas them up. What's your actual first name? I'm not going to address you as that, but you have the floor.
Yeah, listen, you can call me gas them up. If you don't like to call me that, you can call me whatever.
I'm
I've been called words.
I'm going to call you Charles. Listen.
Again,
I'm going to call you Charles. And then Charles, after you, it's going to go to Brandon. So, Charles, you have the floor. Then, Brandon, you have the floor.
Brother, my name is Gas Them Up. I appreciate that. I didn't. Your name is Ebube. I call you Ebube. You could call me Gas Them Up. It's not an offensive term to you. It's not an insult to anybody. I'd appreciate that. Just let's be respectful. You understand?
Yeah.
If you don't, that's fine.
I'm not going to call you by that name. I'm going to call you by your first name. Look, I'm using my first name. You see my face. You see my image.
And that's your choice, sir. We don't need to get bogged down by that. So I would just appreciate the respect. It's kind of
Listen.
Ebube, listen. My brother, cool down. See, when my Niger brother, see, I'm not talking about you, my Niger brother.
And it's not going to go well. Here's the thing.
What I'm trying to explain to you is what you're doing is you're trying to
stop. You're not using your actual image. You're not using your real name. You seem like a coward. Now,
that's great. That's great, my brother. Listen, that's fine. Can I speak my points? That's great. Why are you sidetracking?
A certain way.
Why? First off, why are you sidetracking? I don't understand. It seems like you have a lot of hostility towards me for no reason. I've never disrespected you. It's the first time I've been on the panel with you, right? So I'm not sure where that's coming from. For whatever reason, you have your approach, and you feel you need to address people this way. It's not necessary. Like you said, we can be gentlemen, and I think you should hold yourself to the standard that you stated. The point I wanted to say quickly to Brandon is the idea that we need African-American dollars to come and develop Africa is not necessarily accurate, because prior to IMF regulations that started to, you did say it, but I'm not gonna get caught up with that. Right? Okay, fine. Then you didn't say it. My apologies. My apologies. So I want to ask you 3 questions. So I won't even address Brandon. Let me get straight to my questions. First question is, we see that when Nkrumah had Ghana and he tried this concept of cocoa. Now, of course, he didn't say that he wanted his cocoa sold in the Ghanaian cedi at the time, but he eventually was bankrupted. He found out that his economy got bankrupted because what the Europeans did was that they basically flooded the cocoa market and bankrupted him. So I want to know, if Nigeria is to embark on this, Petro Naira approach, how can they prevent the same type of efforts that were done to Nkrumah's Ghana from being done to them? That's my first question to you.
All right. So you asking Brandon that question, or you asking me?
I'm asking you, sir. I got Brandon's personal. Me and Brandon can talk, but I'm asking you, sir.
Okay, if you could please repeat the question just one more time for me.
Okay, so again, Nkrumah's Ghana attempted to use the cocoa, right, as the cash crop or the commodity to sell to the world and get revenue so they could develop Ghana. What the Europeans ended up doing, and if you read his book on neocolonialism, the Europeans basically bankrupted his country by effectively flooding the price of cocoa. They flooded the cocoa market and dropped the price of cocoa on the world market. So he had difficulties. So my question to you is, if Nigeria embarks on this Petro Naira approach, what can Nigeria do to protect themselves, to, of course, not go through the same type of situations that Nkrumah's Ghana went through?
Okay. Oh, man. And see, that's where, so now what you're seeing is that it's not about a singular action. And you're a pretty intelligent guy. What part, you sound like you may be from Africa. If you don't mind me asking, what part of Africa
I'm Anisoko man. Go ahead, sir.
Correct guy. So now, what you're realizing and what you're pointing out is part of the problem of not having an accompanying system and wanting to exert power, right? So now let's say you have a resource, which could be very profitable. Let's say you have cocoa. And then let's say you make certain demands with your cocoa, right? But then let's say you don't control the system. Now remember, when it comes to having an empire or being the world's #1 country, I did a documentary on this. If you go to my channel Up Close and Center, check out United States of Africa. Very good documentary to watch. It explains most of this. Now, when you're the #1 nation, it means that you've come with an accompanying system that people either join into voluntarily because it's in their best interest, or alternatively because they have no choice. So now I have the system. I control the system. The system is made up of 3 things: a world trade network, which means I can control world trade; a global military order, which means I can have troops at your front door; and then a currency that it makes sense for you to use. So now let's say you come with a product that's demanded on the world market, but you don't want to work within my particular system. What I'm going to do at that point is I'm going to use my system against you to do exactly what you just described. So the real issue isn't merely having a product that people want. It's not about having oil that people want to buy. And this is what I've been stressing the whole time. It's not about just having something people want. It's about having a competing system, because if you're going to challenge the system that's prevailing, you need to come with a counter system to the system that's currently in power, where you have wiggle room to now have power and freedom. So what you just pointed out was a system where, Kwame Nkrumah, very brilliant man, visionary, Pan-Africanist, came and said, well, here's what I see happening. And you know what happened? What you just described. So that highlights the importance of, if you're going to exert power or try to exert power against the prevailing system, you need a system that other people are going to join into voluntarily because it's in their best interest, or alternatively because they have no choice. However, if you don't come with a system, what's going to happen to you is that the system is going to deal with you, because the system isn't going to let you just casually grab power. You have to take power. Power isn't given. So you got the next question.
So just 2 more questions and I'm done. My second question is in reference to the internal politics of Nigeria, right? So as a person from the Niger Delta, where the oil is largely found in Nigeria, I find it interesting that of recent, I think in Zamfara State in the north, they found gold. And they found the gold. Now, Zamfara State is saying that the gold belongs to them, and that whatever revenue they will get, majority of that revenue will go to them. And for the last, since oil has been found in Nigeria, the people of the Niger Delta and some of the Southeast, my Igbo brothers, that has been feeding and maintaining Nigeria, the Nigerian state, as you accurately pointed. So how can we internally manage that first? Because as a Niger Delta person, I'm going to feel very, very funny if, as we see, like I said, the Zamfara example. So yes, they say, okay, Nigeria's money, you pay us in Naira. But again, still, the benefits of that oil revenue is not benefiting the people from that region. And then you see egregious examples such as northern generals, northern big men, not only them, owning oil blocks in the Niger Delta, and they're not from there. And that's something that, so when people say, oh, Nigeria has oil, I say, no, our people have oil. The Nigerian state takes it and uses it for themselves. But and I'll end with that. But when you look at the Zamfara example, when the north has gold, somehow the Nigerian government or the Nigerian state is not looking to annex that gold for the Nigerian greater good. So I wanted to ask you, how do we solve that internal politics and then approach the Naira dollar? The Petro Naira.
Okay, my Isoko brother, one name. Now, here's the issue, and you brought up a good point, right? Now, within Nigeria, now you have to remember that there are systems large and there are systems small. Within Nigeria, and if you could unmute yourself, because I want this to be a dialogue between us, because I see you're a very intelligent guy, and I respect that. Initially, I was cautious because it's just a symbol, and sometimes trolls come in here, but you're very well grounded, so you have my respect so far. But you rightfully pointed out, and let me ask you a question, right? You look at Zamfara Gold. The people have been benefiting that resource that comes from their land, right? But you look at, for example, your village probably has oil, and at best, you're getting a 13% derivation that goes to the entire state.
13%. Yeah.
And which state are you from? Because Isoko people are, I think they're
Delta
in 2 states,
State.
right?
We're in Delta State.
Okay. They're not in any other state?
No. It's Delta State.
Okay. Well, I see Isoko people in PH, maybe not indigents, but okay. So now it goes to the entire state. That 13% derivation goes to the entire state, not particularly your village. So your village could literally be having oil spills, black soot, all sorts of environmental degradation, but then maybe the money is being spent in Wari, the money is being spent in Asaba. So Asaba may be fine, Wari may be fine, but then your village is completely messed up. Let's say your people are fishermen, and now because of oil spills, your people can't fish anymore. But then you should be getting more of the benefits as opposed to not getting the benefits, but then you just have to reap the environmental degradation of being an oil-bearing community. Now, you have to ask yourself, why would such a thing happen? And then you have to realize that Isoko people don't control the system in Delta states or even Nigeria. So now that is what has to be changed internally. If we're just going to talk about Nigeria, talk less of Africa. And if we're going to talk about Delta State, because Isoko people, if they want to see real development within their state, they have to either go east towards Asaba or west towards Wari, because most of the villages in your land, some of them might not have proper hospitals, but billions of dollars have been made from that particular area. And once again, that goes back to the system. You go to Zamfara State, and somehow, some way, that gold is benefiting those communities. That gold is benefiting the traditional rulers there. So now we have to say, wait a minute, why is it that the system in Nigeria allows something like that to happen? And then we have to say, maybe we need to make steps to change that system.
Dynast, can I ask
No, definitely. And my last question, I'm sorry to cut you up, man. My last question. I got just 3 questions. I just had 3 questions, Brandon. You went, so let me just say my last question. Again, for Ebube. The African, the nation state project in terms of, and I've been saying this, the 2 Nigeria's been on, in my opinion, I feel that outside of the commodities that African states sell, they're broke, right? They don't have the internal tax revenue to really finance a lot of these capital-based or capital-intensive projects. So what I'm trying to wonder for you, let's say that does happen, and now the Nigerian central bank says, hey, I want or the Nigerian state says our oil must be paid for in Naira. That will mean that there's now a demand or an increase in demand for the Naira. There's already inflationary pressures in Nigeria already, right? So how is the Nigerian government going to balance that? How is the central bank going to balance producing more Naira with the inflation that's already on the ground? Right. So I guess that's, what are the mechanics going to look like? Let's say Nigeria somehow, like you said, the system, we're able to create a system that can keep us safe so we don't go through what Nkrumah went through. What's the mechanism going to look like on a central bank level? That's what I wanted to ask. My last question.
Okay. And don't mute yourself, because you've actually earned my respect through these questions. I see that you're a very serious person, that you're also a very cerebral person. And I'll ask you a question before I answer your question. May I know your first name so that I can address you properly?
It's Gas Them Up. If you want, send me an email on the back channel, and me and you will build.
Leave it.
Everybody on the platform contacts me. Dynast, we email, so we'll build. If you want, send me an email, and me and you will link up, brother.
Cool. No problem at all. And part of that is because sometimes trolls come in and they haven't paid me for my time for me to even give them my attention, but you're clearly on point. Now, so when we talk about that, there's the internal system that has to be dealt with, right? And what I always say is that it's going to come to a point where Nigeria is going to have a workable system. Currently, the system that's there isn't workable, in my personal opinion. But if elected president of Nigeria, when the time is right, the first thing I'm coming with is a system. Now, some people may or may not like it, but that's what's going to happen. The system will be changed. The system will be changed to something that's workable. So now once you have a workable system in the country, things like electricity, things like good schools, things like roads being built where they're supposed to be built naturally happen, because within a system that's serious, those are the things that you focus on, because those are the core objectives. However, if the system is merely about obtaining political positions in order to steal money from government, in order to make sure that I drive the best Range Rover Sports, best bulletproof cars, live in the best mansions, and enjoy myself the most, and my political cronies also have that as well, well, then you see that's the system. And we're not going to go far. Yes, we're going to make money. Yes, you're going to see nice things in the country, but no, we're not going to make progress. Yes, we're going to make money, but no, we're not going to make progress. And that's the cycle that we've been trapped in, because, yeah, a lot of people are making money. A lot of people are good, but a lot of people aren't. And as a nation, we're not really progressing, because you can't say we're better off today than we were 10 years ago. In fact, some people might say we're worse off. So there's a certain change, a fundamental change in the system that needs to take place before we can actually talk about progress. What you're talking about is progress. We can't get to progress, not yet, until we deal with the system that's currently on ground. The current system on ground is kleptocracy, prebendalism, corruption. These are the things that we have to deal with first before we talk about progress. Because once we get past these things, we have enough money, we have enough people, we have enough smart intellectual people to achieve whatever we want to achieve. You just have to ask the question, what are we doing to utilize these people and put them in position? It's like, imagine if you coach a football team and you have some of the greatest players, but you're keeping them on the bench and you're losing every game. At that point, it's your fault, because you're not playing your best players.
Can I ask one question, and anybody can answer this? Name one area in the world where the United States of America is doing what China is doing, as far as sending their citizens into countries to basically take over the economy. Like, China's moving in. America comes to visit. China straight moves in. Do you think
America doesn't have to do that, Brandon? They send capital over. America doesn't have to do that. That's why you can read the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. America, like Ebube says, has a system.
I'll get him up. I was just about to say they send their economic hitman.
Yes, but when they send their economic capital, the people of that place get to utilize that and come up.
No, the leaders, Brandon. That's why Africa's messed up. Because, Brandon, you just made a point. You said that if America goes, Nigeria collapses. That might be a great thing, because most of those African leaders are propped up. On Brandon's show last few weeks, I said it. You had Atiku, who's running for office. He had a warrant out for his arrest in the United States because of a Halliburton scandal. He makes a phone call to the Illuminati Mafia in America, and somehow he had a 24-hour window to come to America to have a conversation with somebody when he was running for election. So if America, let's say, is no longer the dominant player in the world system, many of these African states, some of them might collapse. That might be a good thing, because then the leaders might be responsible to the people.
That is not a good thing right now. If the United States is replaced and then an African country collapses and African countries have built up some form of independence, that's okay. But at this point, you guys are like a naked baby. If you guys collapse, China gonna move right on in, pay your people more than you can pay them to ensure their dominance. And then you're gonna have Chinese chiefs.
You just said China's a half third world country. How are they gonna be able to fund that? You just said China's a half third world country.
Wait, let's chill. Hey, my Soko guy. Let Brandon have his due. You know, you had your moment. Everybody respected you. We all let you speak. Let's let Brandon speak. Brandon, you have the floor. If you want to ask a question, ask a question. If you want to make some statements, make statements. It's yours.
I'm gonna ask the question. When you talk about, they send capital, at least Africans are getting that capital. African leaders, African people can demand things from African leaders. African people can't demand shit from a Chinese businessman who's just coming over to open up a Chinese food store. China is sending their people to take over your economy physically. America is sending capital, which is what investment is, so that they can get a take out of it for their capital that they're sending. That's, to me, that's more fair. That's capitalism. What part of, if America's replaced, Africa becomes flooded with Chinese, even more than it already is, with the military backing to where you can't even keep them from saying, hey, guess what? Your place has now become our place. So when Africans,
Brandon, let me answer your question. I see that you're asking the question. I'm going to answer that. I'm going to say that the Chinese threat on the continent sometimes is overhyped. Most African economies. So, for example, if you go to Nigeria, Chinese people aren't running the economy. They're far from it. They're economic refugees. They're economic. It's like me saying that
that's
people across. Brandon, let me just land. It's like saying that the people that hop the Rio Grande and come into America are running the economy. They're not. What they are is economic refugees, people who couldn't cut it in their country. They're coming over to Africa because they need Africa. You're not going to travel from Beijing all the way to Abeokuta because Abeokuta is better than Beijing. You're going there because you're in Beijing, you couldn't cut it. You're not that guy. You're struggling. But maybe in Abeokuta, you have a chance. They're going there the same way that people hop in the Rio Grande coming into America. They're essentially economic refugees. And to say that these economic refugees, to say that these economic refugees are running the country, it's just not possible.
Do you live in California?
Brandon, I'm going to make a distinction. Third, fourth, and fifth generation Chicanos who've been there for almost 150 years, they might be better situated than the people that are economic refugees. You know, there's a distinction. You're a Cali guy. I know you know the distinction between the guys who their great-grandfather has been in Los Angeles versus the guy who just literally came over last week. There's a difference. I'm not saying the Chicanos who've been there. I'm saying the guys who just came in last week. That's essentially what the Chinese are in Africa. Many of them are coming to Africa because in China, they were living very poor, and they see, you know what, if I go to Africa, maybe things will turn around for me. What we do in our heads sometimes is we make these guys bigger than they actually are. They're not. They're coming over because they need our help. They need Africa. The same way I say to anybody, Africa has a lot of needs. There's a large technological gap to fill. If you show up and fill it, then you can make millions, potentially billions. They're hoping to make millions, potentially billions, because they can't do that in their own home country. However, at any given moment, if they need to be kicked out or they need to leave the country, one policy will get them all out of there. And that has been done in the past. That has been done currently. And you'd be surprised if you go to Nigeria, for example, and anytime those businesses by those type of foreigners run afoul, immigration shows up and they say, okay, where are your papers? Your papers aren't right. They're on a plane out of the country the next day. So let's stop giving them the power as if they're this powerful group in Africa. They're not. The thing is, they're coming over hoping to make a living. They're economic migrants. But the thing is this, at the end of the day, we're talking about systems, not nations collapsing. So now let's say, for example, that the system set up by America, they've cut Russia out of. See, America has gone forth to say, Russia, you can't be in our system. China is within the American system. However, China has been trying to make their own system just in case they need to have a system where they rely on, which I think is a great thing. You should be self-sufficient as a nation if you're serious in this power game. Now, Russia being cut off from the American system, that's an interesting point because the world is watching to see, okay, Russia, you're big and bad. You're invading Ukraine. You're enforcing your way in Eastern Europe. You've been cut off from the American system. What are you really about? It's sink or swim time. Now, Russia has two options. Either they're going to sink or they're going to swim. Let's say that Russia swims and they come up with a system or pair within a system, and they show the world that being cut off from the American system isn't the worst thing in the world. Because if you look at it, certain nations in West Asia, some people call it the Middle East, are already pulling away from the American system, saying, okay, let me see how this thing goes, because being wholly dependent on one system doesn't necessarily benefit me. Being able to pick and choose, it's like being asked out to prom by 4 different girls as opposed to one, right? You have more systems to choose from. You say, you know what? Well, I'm going to make a list of all of them and decide the pros and cons and be able to pick the best system for me. So what we're essentially witnessing is a situation where America is saying, look, you can't be in the club anymore. Russia, what are you going to do? So now Russia might just potentially come up with its own system if it's serious, or it might not. If it doesn't, well, then Russia really made a mistake, and they're really in some deep water. So that's what we're saying. We're not saying nations collapsing. We're not saying any of that. We're merely saying the actions of a certain nation to remove other nations from their particular system. Let's see the effect that it has on geopolitics. And so my Isoko brother, who pointed out from Delta State, said, well, you know, for example, let's say Nigeria decides to say, well, if Russia can transact oil and gas transactions within their currency, then why can't we? And that's a separate analysis, because it's assuming that Russia is going to swim as opposed to sink. So let's say Russia now swims. Other nations might say, you know what? There may be other competing nations, and remember, other competing systems among the nations. And remember that when it comes to a system, nations either join your system because they have no choice, or it's because it's in their best interest. Right now, it's in the best interest of most nations to use the American system. However, things are changing because nations are starting to say, wait a minute, we're using a system that gives one particular nation a great amount of power. And this isn't something that's new. This has been here since Charles de Gaulle. Oh man, it looks like we lost Brandon. But I'll continue to answer. Hopefully, you can see
on the and you got 290 too. So finish. You can finish it. Then let's bring 290 on. Then we're going to close out in like 10, 15 minutes. So
all right. So Brandon, we just it's all about systems. 290, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think today, by and large, you have been on point, especially with the point Brandon was raising. And I'm quite impressed by that, although if the confusion with gas them up was a bit of a episode. But that said, I think Nigeria declaring the petrodollar is something that, basically declaring war against the US is a non-starter. And it's not starting in the next 30 years. If anything, maybe Africa might be able to do it in the next 20 years or so, but not Nigeria. And I think also that these kind of systems, coming up like with the Russians and the Chinese, might be a precursor to of a symptom of a problem that has not been resolved during the Second World War. Because after the Second World War, there was a system that was created for international relations, and they kept it at the level of the UN. But while America retained the unilateral approach to power and finance, basically in the hands of the West, which is crazy when you think about it. The whole world is trading through the West. And if the Chinese goes on their own now and the Russians go their way too, you would start having a multilateral kind of system of finance. And that could lead to, in the end, a kind of conflagration, in other words, war between them, because sooner or later, you can't have, the world is already paying the price for it right now because of the inefficiencies that comes from different systems of payments. We will not have it as good as we have it now, because it will take a while for all the different regions to become more isolated and build their own financial system. They have to build their own industries, and it's just not good. It's not good for the world. And sooner or later, they have to figure out a way to come together and make this stuff a more international system, because the US has this thing control the finances of the world basically for way too long. And internally, the system has become more of a multilateral system, because the Chinese and the Russians, they don't exactly sit by and watch the Americans just print dollars and kind of destroy their currency. They wouldn't do that. This is why the Chinese often manipulate their currencies too, and America accuse them of manipulating currencies and all the rest of it, vice versa. Because the Chinese they caught on to the game. Africans don't have that, and it puts us in a very, very bad this situation. Hence why start talking about our own currency or our own system is not even on the cards right now. So my take from this is that the way it's going to happen is that the world cannot settle for different systems. Sooner or later, they will come to a head again. And whenever this type of things occur, that's kind of stuff that used to happen before, you're going to have problems. And if I'm to ask a question, where do you think, how do you believe that the US will be, or the West, let's put it that way, the West, and let me even specify it even more, the Anglo-Saxon part of the West will back down and allow the Chinese and the rest of the world be part of decision making eventually in terms of financial control. When you talk about dollars, so because currencies are already changing, let's face it, that one is going. Currencies are going. They are already creating e-currencies. They are basically vouchers, really. Currencies that can limit the way you buy stuff. If you want to use it, if they give you currency, if they give you money to go and buy food, you are not allowed to use it to go and buy other things. So it's already happening, and so the currencies are going as we know it. So, but with the West, are they willing to give up control of that in a peaceful way? Because this question is a question that is pertinent to the world we are living in today. Because I asked this question to an intelligence analyst of the US, because I put it to him that the West and the Anglo-Saxon arm of the West especially have gained a lot from exerting power, violence. They've used nuclear weapons, they've done everything, so they don't have any reason to give up power easy. They are the only group. If you look at the French, they don't care too much about this. They would have spoken to Russians a long time ago. The Germans, they would have. But the people that are really holding the line is the Anglo-Saxon arm. And so I asked him, would they give up power easy? That it's like because they are so used to power and they've gained a lot from power, it's like somebody that is into drugs. If they don't realize that they have that addiction, how would they give it up? And he was surprised. He was like, that seems like a good point to raise, because that is exactly what we are seeing playing out in the world today. This competition is going on, and where do you see it ending? Because I don't believe if they operate separately, something has got to give. Nigeria is already paying the price for it. Nigeria cannot even go ahead with the Ajakuta steel industry now. This thing rebuild, because the Russians were due to come in February to come and start checking what they need and all the rest of it, so they can build it again. But now, because of the war, boom, they are cut off. Now Nigeria is talking to a French UK company that remains nameless. Proforce wants to build a drone. Now they have to talk to the French company, because they cannot go to Russia. They cannot go to, even the Chinese are being sanctioned. So what is going on here is that for Africans, it's affecting us quite negatively, because they are trying to cut us off from our source. Where you talked about, being asked for a prom by 4 guys. That's how it is. Africa used to have that option, but they are trying to cut that off now again. And this stuff that is going on, if they cut the Africans off from that, and the Chinese need Africa, the Russians need Africa for whatever they need Africa for, you can see that even if you have that multiple system, sooner or later it's going to come to a head, because these people are going to be fighting for resources and competing for resources, and you can't just have multiple systems going around in the world, because price of things will just skyrocket and things are just going to get out of control sooner or later. If Russia wants to go and trade in the world and American ships are in the water, that could be a problem. There are so many areas where this stuff could lead to a massive war. So
You know what's strange? Actually, America's ships protect Chinese trade.
yeah,
America essentially uses its navy to ensure world trade. But to address the question, if you could make it more concise, because you asked a few questions and they're all really good. If you could maybe break them down into your top 3 questions, they can all be directly addressed. That'd be perfect.
And then we'll
okay,
close out after that. But go ahead, Nigel.
okay. Let me tie. I'll put one directly for Nigeria, and then given all these, the points I've raised about how this is beginning to affect Nigeria, even. How do you think the Nigerian government can circumvent this? Can they break the sanctions and stuff like that? That's one. Regarding the overall system, the financial system, how it works right now, when sooner or later when it comes to a head, how do you foresee that coming? How do you see that being resolved? Do you think this stuff can be resolved internationally? With the US, you know what? Let's let the whole world calm down and everybody decide on how things work. Even if we have been doing it in the background with the Chinese and the Russians and maybe the Indians a little bit, and definitely the EU, but let's now do it officially. Do you see that happening peacefully? I'll just leave it at those 2 questions.
Okay, so the first 2 questions, or the last question, do you see that happening peacefully? And then the first question, okay. Now, when it comes, I'll address the first question, then I'll go to the second question. When it comes to the first question that you asked, now, once again, it's all about a system. And it's not just about saying that you're in charge. It's about actually coming with a system that, remember, and once again, I did a documentary on it. If you haven't been to Up Close and Center, after this broadcast, make sure you go to Up Close and Center, you check it out, and you subscribe, and you check out United States of Africa. So now, in United States of Africa, I covered these 2 issues. Remember that whenever you want to you want to get to a certain point in power, you have to have a system, and people have to follow your system. And so Nigeria is a long way away from having other nations, Belgium, for example, follow Nigeria's system, because Nigeria has a lot of problems internally that need to be worked out before they can start telling other people that, yeah, we've worked out everything in Nigeria and now you guys need to follow what we're doing, right? A lot needs to happen.
The point I was asking was that how can Nigeria circumvent these sanctions against the other alternatives that we have? Because they are beginning to pigeonhole us again now. And for me, I believe that is a second colonialism that is coming. Because if they pigeonhole us, we don't have options.
So, for example, if you look at what's happening now, right, with the Ajay Akuta contract that was given to, I believe, a Russian company, the USSR initially built it. It's all USSR technology. So the technology the contract that was signed 2 years ago was with Russia, and the work was supposed to commence. The consulting commenced a year and a half ago, and now they were supposed to shift into the portion where they actually were going to do the work. But for some reason, the UK had issues and said, you know what? Don't contract with Russia anymore. Contract with us.
Because of
so now it's like, okay, what Nigeria should do is play both of them against each other. All right, I'm going to bring up quickly, before we run out of time, I'm going to bring up quickly a situation where an African nation played 2 European powers against themselves. I believe it was Menelik. I'm not sure, but it was an Ethiopian emperor. I believe it was Menelik. I'm going to double check on my Ethiopian history, but when he learned you got to remember, Ethiopia had ambassadors in Europe for almost 500 years before the Italians decided to invade. And so when the Italians invaded, Ethiopia knew what was going on in Europe so well that they knew that Russia had an ongoing beef with Italy. So they reached out to the Russian ambassador. They met him somewhere, I believe it was somewhere in Russia. And they said, look, your enemy is Italy. They're invading. They have these really sophisticated weapons. The guns we have are muskets. They have really sophisticated weapons. We'll purchase sophisticated weapons from you that we'll use to fight them so that it's a fair fight, because, Ethiopia is very mountainous. And so he used those two European powers against themselves to make sure that there was an African victory. That should be a model for every African nation. So right now, you have Russia wanting to make money in Nigeria with the Ajaokuta steel factory. You have the UK stepping in saying, wait a minute, don't contract with them, contract with us. Now it's the point for an African nation to say, wait a minute, let me make sure that whatever I do, Africa is going to win. Do you see how that goes? So it's that is what needs to be done with that particular issue. But
Nigeria has already gone with the UK company. That's the point. They've already gone with the UK company. Question is, like
I'm merely saying what should happen, not what has happened, but what should happen. Because at the end of the day, it's all about African empowerment, and every African government should be about their empowerment of the continent, and then of the people who come from the continent who are scattered all over the planet. That's the definition of Pan-Africanism. But quickly, so we don't run afoul of the time, could you give me your second question again so I can go ahead and jump on that?
Yeah. Regarding the second question, it's about how the world is going to move forward, because if they go about with this multi-axis financial system, sooner or later it's going to come to a head because it's inefficient and it's going to be very, very hard to police. Because like you said, Americans had to even protect the Chinese trade. So if they go this way, you're going to have a problem sooner or later. So that's in my mind anyway. But I'm asking you, how do you see this playing out eventually? Because they still it has to be resolved to one point, like it was once in the hands of the US. Do you think it's going to be, come to like a kind of UN kind of financial system, or a universal kind of financial system, or is going to just lead to a war and God knows where we are going to end up? Because the original question was, do you think the West is going to back down? Would they give up that power?
Nobody gives up power. Nobody gives up power at all. What's going to happen is this, and there's never really a sustainable multipolar system. What's going to happen is that there's one system that's going to rule, right? It's like the NBA championship. You can have a lot of good teams, but at the end of the day, when they get into the playoffs, there are a few good teams in the playoffs, but only one team is going to have the championship. That's how it is with world systems. Now, they may come up with a bunch of different systems, and everybody will try to, for example, before 1991, you had two prevailing systems. You had the Soviets and you had the U.S., and so the Soviets would say, hey, come over to our side. The U.S. would say, hey, come over to our side. But eventually one system won over the other system. So whenever there's a multipolar system, there's competitions within who's going to have the ultimate system. So you're right. There's going to be a war. It might not be a war, a physical war. It might be a Cold War. Russia and America never actually bombed each other's heartlands, but they went to war in other ways. And so what happens is this. Whenever there's a war or there are people fighting, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and say, all right, I see you two people are fighting and you two people aren't me. What can I do to increase my power with you two guys fighting? And that's the route I'm going to go. Right? And I brought up the Ethiopian emperor because he said, all right, Italy and Russia at that particular moment in time, they had a very big beef going on. And Italy invaded Ethiopia. And so the emperor sent word to Russia and said, hey, give us a bunch of guns that you normally wouldn't give anybody else so that we can deal with your enemy. See, geopolitics is like a dance. You have to have a little bit of grace to be able to take care of what you need to take care of while ensuring that your power is extended. And that's how you play the game. At the end of the day, your power must be extended. And if you're not playing the game like that, you don't need to be leading Africa.
I would have had one more question, but Dynas is there yawning away. So
yeah. We gotta do part two. I gotta.
Listen, I'll be back next week. We can do this all over.
You'll be back
next week.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. I'm not yawning because I'm tired. I gotta catch my air or whatever. So, but hey, listen, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, family, Dynasty Search for Huru. Peace.